There we go. For Wednesday, October 5th. This opportunity, public comments. I do not have any speaker cards. This is an opportunity for the public to address the committee on items that are not on the agenda. Is there anybody out there at this time that would like to speak? Hold back. Okay. We have a full house this evening. Item number 3, approval of minutes from our June 1st meeting. I have a first by Mitchoff.
Second.
Second by McCoy. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? 4-1 with one, 4 approval with one abstention. There we go. On to consent items, consent calendar. There are no items on the consent calendar this evening. Regular agenda items, the Contra Costa Safe Routes to School Program Report. Mr. Beck. Okay.
Yeah. We were chatting out in the other room.
Did we all read the report?
Yes.
Yes.
If we did, we can just accept the report unless Brad really wants to. We've all read the report.
Thank you. Sorry, I got distracted and forgot to put on my tie. So thank you. Over the last several years, the authority has been working with local staff and agencies and our consultant team to understand how children get to school, what obstacles they face, and to identify ways to make walking and bicycling to school safer and easier. This summer, we completed work on the project, which is summarized in the executive summary that's included as attachment A. The report has 4 parts. There's an existing conditions summary, a needs assessment, an online resource guide, and the documentation of technical assistance that we provided to jurisdictions and agencies throughout the county. The existing conditions report summarized how children got to school, their perceived barriers to walking and bicycling, existing supportive programs in the county, and existing infrastructure funding and programs. The needs assessment estimated the amount of funding that would be required to comprehensively address safe routes to school needs for Contra Costa's public schools. The assessment estimated that there is about $243 million in needs to provide a comprehensive safe routes to school system around schools in Contra Costa. It also estimated there's an annual need of $57.6 million for different programs. The largest share of that would be school bus programs, such as we see in the La Miranda and San Ramon Valley, and the subsidized transit passes that we see in West County. The resource guide makes up the 3rd section of the report. It contains information to help local communities guide their planning, designing, and implementing of safe routes to school infrastructure improvements and support programs. It includes online resources for creating and sustaining programs from design and community development to program evaluation, as well as funding resources and research and policies on safe routes to school. The final section compiles the 17 technical assistance report that was done as part of the final task. The reports range from preparing a concept plan and cost estimate for crosswalk, sidewalk, and street improvements at Marsh Elementary in Antioch, preparing a concept plan for crosswalk improvements at San Ramon Valley High School in Danville, identifying recommended safety improvements at Parkmead Elementary in Saranac, and preparing concept plans for crosswalk, sidewalk, and street improvements at Downer Elementary in San Pablo. We're hoping that these reports will help jurisdictions address safety and access issues around those schools and help them in applying for funding that could be used to fund those improvements. We'd like to thank Fair and Peers for their support on this project. Julie Pierce, Julie Morgan, sorry, a principal with the firm, is here in the audience who can help answer any questions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have on the different projects and programs.
Any questions at this time? Yes.
I see that it says that should we accept this and it moves on to the full authority, it will post on the website. What's next? Is it just a resource document for people applying for grants, or what happens?
The resource guide would just be a resource document for agencies, school districts, as well as jurisdictions to help support their planning for improvements for safe routes to school. The technical assistance reports we're going to post them. Other jurisdictions could perhaps learn from some of the reports that we've done for other jurisdictions and apply them in their own. And we're hoping that the jurisdictions who got the technical assistance will be able to use them as well.
Well, that's my thing. It's a great report. I hate to see it just sitting on a shelf. And we're still going to continue doing a safe route to school. So I guess at some point we'll do another one. It's a great program. It just seems like that means ugh. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, certainly that's something we could look into is, for example, updating the resource guide periodically to make sure that the information is up to date and that they're adding new research that's been done or new approaches that.
Well, I'll move to
jurisdiction
accept
might
the
want.
report with the caveat that as it moves forward to the authority, that we consider staff's assessment in the future of when it's time to update the report. That it doesn't just sit there unless.
Right.
I want
Is it
something
doing
to
any
happen.
good? Yeah. Is there a way that we can become more of an advocate or more of a way of pushing the communities or helping them with their, we've created a report, we put it on their lap, and now we're going to walk away and say, do with it what you will. I read the report. I thought it was a great report. It addressed a lot of the issues, and I'm always wondering why aren't they walking more? Why aren't they biking more? How do we get, everyone talks about overweight kids, and the problem is they're all being driven to school and back from school.
Yeah, look at that.
And no one is out there driving. Mr. Tatson.
So as I recall in Measure J, we have essentially some money that could fit into a safe routes to school category, and in Measure X, if it passes, the same is true. So maybe we could ask staff to think about how we take those expenditure categories and use the recommendations of this report to help make sure that we spend the money in an effective manner.
Yeah, I just think as we're moving it forward, it shouldn't just be that we're accepting the report, that there should be some action behind it. I'll leave it to staff to figure out what you want to put in the recommendation to the full authority for our approval.
I agree. I would like to see some more, follow-up, follow-through, proactive steps. You've identified some areas where they could make safe routes to school better, crosswalks, better safety, and maybe there could be some more proactive means of helping jurisdictions move forward on that, because I do think it's important.
Part of it is to ask the RTPCs to accept it or to review it and come back with some ideas about how they're going to use it within their areas.
Well, there was a number of locations already identified, and so this is almost right down to every community. I know there's 3 in Oakley, and I've already brought it up with the city manager and the engineers and saying, what are we going to do with this? And hopefully they'll come back with a plan shortly to figure out how we can use the information received in the report to move forward on it. But like I said, it's easy for me to do because I read it. Who else is going to read it, and how effective, and how can we push that information out there and make sure that people are using it and moving forward in a positive way with it.
So, go for it, David.
So yeah, so I have a first.
Quick question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Durant.
So I guess my first big question is, first of all, have the planning staffs at all the cities received this, and are they on the list to get the full report when it's completed? I have a follow-up to that, but that's my first question.
Excuse me. Yes, that's the intent, is to, especially the resource guide and the technical assistance reports, but the full report, we'll post it and notify local staff of its availability.
Okay. And schools as well?
Yes, we can do that.
I would do that. So I think at a minimum, when it comes to the full authority board, part of the introduction to this or sort of the staff memo, indicate why this is being produced now, what its intended use is, how the recipients of it are expected or intended to use it. Because I think fundamentally the whole underlying purpose of this, though I don't go back and look at the old RFP or whatever it was that we originally did, was to have this available as a tool that people can then use to actually implement safe routes to school strategies. And I think simply headlining that is one way to address the issue that Karen's raising.
Okay. So I have a first and a second. First by Mitchoff, second by Durant. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. On to item 2.0, status of planning grants, PDA planning grants. Again, Mr. Beck.
Yes, thank you. In September of, 2 years ago, the authority approved $2.745 million for PDA planning grants in the county. There were 10 of them. And tonight we just want to give you an update on what the status of them is. So far, of the 10, we've expended about half, 54%. That's $1.5 million of the $2.7 million available. There are 4 projects that are complete, one that's just about complete. And the attachment A includes a statement of the status of those projects. There's one that took a while to get going. That's the Walnut Creek one. It happens to be the biggest one. There are a lot of issues about scope, and we got some additional, we had to move some money around, got some additional money from Walnut Creek to do some additional traffic counting as part of the scope of work. So tonight we wanted to bring you the status of the projects and what they've done as part of their projects.
Questions of staff? Motions? Comments?
I found it useful. I thought that the description of what's going on in the Lafayette grant was accurate. I'd be happy to move to it's encouraging. Sometimes I don't. I'm happy to move to accept the report.
I'll second.
And first by Tatson, second by McCoy. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. On to item 3.0, which is a review of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission's proposed Plan Bay Area 2040. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair Romick. Good evening, Planning Committee members. In late August, MTC and ABAG released their draft preferred scenario of the 2017 Regional Transportation Plan, also known as Plan Bay Area 2040. The draft preferred scenario builds off of the 2013 RTP and is guided once again by policies under SB 375 that require it to develop a sustainable community strategy in order to reduce per capita greenhouse gas emissions and house the region's population at all income levels. As with the last RTP, the draft preferred scenario focuses development and growth around transit stations in priority development areas. The agencies released a memo with the draft land use allocations of households and jobs at the city level and asked stakeholders to review and comment by October 14th. And you can see the city level allocations that we summarized on page 3.4. There's RTPC level allocations on page 3-3. Staff has reviewed the draft scenario and drafted the comment letter that's in your packet. The highlights are as follows. We found that the plan increases the number of new households in the 9-county Bay Area through 2040 by 820,000 households, as compared to the 700,000 new households projected in the last RTP. For Contra Costa, the number of households is forecast to grow by 115,000, and that's a 31% increase. Back in 2013, they forecasted a 24% increase in households. Jobs under the draft scenario are forecast to grow by 112,000. That's lower than the increase in projections 2013 by 9%. West and East counties are seeing significantly more households in this plan than P2013, and West and Central County are seeing significantly more jobs than in the last RTP. The overall trend of placing more homes in areas like East Contra Costa while placing the jobs in the big 3 cities of the region further exacerbates our out commute of workers and leads to worsening congestion and transit crowding, as you've probably noticed. Contra Costa commuters today have the longest commutes in the entire Bay Area, and so we see these forecasts further compounding those commutes. And also adding to this, under the draft scenarios, that Solano County to our north is becoming an even bigger bedroom community under the plan, and their workers must travel through Contra Costa in order to reach their quality jobs. Contra Costa has made significant investment of our local Measure J and Measure C dollars in our transportation system, and we're worried that this trend of increasing the bedroom communities in Solano and Contra Costa will erode the progress that we've made over the last 25 years, placing significant burden on I-80, State Route 4, 680, and the BART system. So in the letter that's in your packet, we thank the regional agencies for recognizing Contra Costa's urban limit line policies and for removing the assumption that these urban limit lines will be changing over time, as was proposed in their no project alternative. So that is no longer in the preferred scenario. In addition, we've encouraged MTC to include the Priority Production Area Program. It was formerly known as Priority Industrial Areas in their future RTPs, as Contra Costa's Northern Waterfront Initiative would be a prime candidate for this program and could have a positive impact on the efforts to economically redevelop the waterfront zone. There are also some inconsistencies and anomalies that we found in the land use at the city level, and we're working with MTC and ABAG offline to rectify those issues. On the transportation improvements side of the draft preferred scenario, we were able to get all of the county's priority projects listed in the plan, including the I-80 and I-680 transit improvement projects, SR4 operational improvements, the airport connector near Byron, EBART Phase 2, all phases of the 680 Highway 4 interchange, the Brentwood Intermodal Station and Oakley Park and Ride, complete streets programs, and the connected vehicle program. So we're very happy with that side of things. The final preferred scenario is scheduled to be adopted by the regional agencies this November, and so staff's recommendation is to transmit the comment letter in your packet to MTC and ABAG for their consideration.
Martin and I were at a wonderfully frustrating Regional Planning Committee meeting today. He may have already advised staff, but for the benefit of my colleagues here, we have some colleagues in other counties who believe that housing is a higher priority, and I mean, forget they're called priority development, priority production. They feel that what we were moving to do today was to move on the concept of the priority production areas for further discussion and development. But there was a concerted effort by the BIA and the Bay Area Council to do a substitute motion to my motion to say that housing was more important than jobs. I fought back. You does no good, and I appreciate the letter that has been drafted because we will be the drive-through community, and I had several discussions after the meeting. I will continue to advocate that they are equal, and it isn't a matter of, my concern is if grant dollars become available. So in the bullet that says, Matt, we want to encourage for the next RTP, I want stronger language there. I don't even want the word encourage, and I'll leave it to you and Martin to come up with, we strongly advocate for something. They need to get the message. What we argued was it's local control, and we're not saying those of you who have more of a housing problem, go for it. Get your housing. Do whatever you want to do. But in Contra Costa County, we need jobs so that people can not have to drive on that out commute or whatever the correct term is. I actually had an interesting conversation with Matt Regan afterwards, and his argument was there was something in the paper that said there were 20,000 people that moved to Texas, and that just shows that we don't have affordable housing. And I said, well, that shows that we have houses for 20,000 people now. He didn't think that was so humorous, but I did. And again, we're just saying that they should be equal or be presented in Plan Bay area as another way of attracting grant dollars and economic development. And I even made the argument, folks, having heard from my colleagues here, we have housing in East County. I'll let you all fight that battle of what the numbers should be, but we still in Contra Costa County have a housing issue, whether it's, and I think it's a surplus. I've also had a conversation with several people in the county. What is affordable housing anymore? Without redevelopment, there's really no way to do affordable housing. And it was very frustrating that all of the home builders and housing advocates were the ones that were able to get the motion passed that housing will be the priority. And as I say, I don't continue, I'm not going to let this drop. We're moving forward on this, but I think there needs to be stronger language, and you don't have to bring it back here before it goes to the authority. You can just, that would be my recommendation to my colleagues. I trust that you can put some more stronger language around the fact that we strongly believe that priority production areas need to be included, and that all three, PCAs, PDAs, and PPAs, and actually someone gave me a concept to call it manufacturing activity zones. Because some people, once it's been zoned as an industrial area, if housing goes there, or a plan comes in for housing, you'll never get it back. And we're not looking to do dirty industries anymore. We're looking to do clean industries that create middle-class jobs. We actually had a graph that showed in 2010, I believe, that it was like, correct me if I'm wrong, Martin, 45% of the jobs were middle income, and in 2040 that 46%. It's the largest sector that we need to have there. So I'm sort of preaching to the choir, but you're getting my pent-upness having been on the Bay Bridge for 2 hours coming to this meeting. Because I had a constituent write me the other day, this traffic is just awful. What are you going to do about it? And I was like, well, you and everybody else are on the road. Who's more important than the other person? We all want to get somewhere. So I'm rambling. I'm frustrated. I'm downloading You're My Therapist tonight. But we need stronger language there. Thank you.
Point taken.
Sure.
I agree with Karen. I was pleased that you specifically mentioned the Northern Waterfront Initiative. They seem to have ignored that, and I think it's important that they don't. I was actually surprised at some of what seemed to be wild swings in some of the numbers if you look at the chart, and that's a little concerning because jurisdictions look at these things and they're trying to plan towards them, and then they change the numbers wildly, and But the other thing is that you kind of mentioned, and I think there needs to be stronger language on this as well. We expect most of those new vehicle trips to cross the Carquinez and Benicia Martinez bridges, seeking employment in Contra Costa and to the major job centers, so on and so forth. I think at some point, this agency needs to somehow work with MTC or some other groups to specifically address that we are bearing in many ways the transportation, car, greenhouse gas burden, and we're paying for it financially as well. And somehow that needs to be addressed in a broader regional scope. I mean, we see it on 80 every day. You can't go anywhere on 80 without it being a traffic jam. And I'm talking Saturday morning, you know,
Yep.
and it is becoming a real problem. And it isn't just West County driving on there.
I would agree with Commissioner Mishoff's comments that the language should be stronger, almost to the point of, we would expect no less than.
Oh, I like that.
This, what we're talking about in the next RTP. But I had a question for you based on your meeting. So if we're now being asked to absorb more households because employment growth will occur elsewhere, how does the discussion go when someone says, well, why don't the jurisdictions that are anticipating the employment growth provide an appropriate amount of housing? And if they can't do that, that will by nature push the job somewhere else.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I don't know if anybody had the opportunity. I thought it was a very interesting article this morning that the county of San Francisco is thinking of annexing the city of Brisbane in the county of San Mateo to meet their needs. Right. And I had that discussion with Matt after the meeting, because obviously he's with the Bay Area Council and they're looking. I said, I sit at these ABAG meetings. Don't tell me that you can have affordable housing in Palo Alto and Sunnyvale. I hear you should, but you're not going to. And his idea was to use cap and trade dollars to convince San Jose to do the building for the people that are, so for the school teachers to live in San Jose to go there. And I said, Matt, what you're not addressing is the greenhouse gas and all of the 375-32, which today I know from our supervisor Joya is the 10th anniversary. He had a picture posted with him and Arnold and him and Jerry. I'm like, woohoo! But you're right. It's very frustrating. I don't have a problem with the majority of the jobs being centered in our three major cities, but don't preclude these other counties, suburban, from trying to increase our economic development base and take some of that off, that pressure, because as Sherry says, we're bearing the brunt of the traffic financially, physically, and infrastructure-wise. So that's it, Don. It's a bang your head against the wall.
And is there any discussion, I know it exists in some academic journals, about having job creators support housing?
Well, that's what I brought up. It's like, what do you want houses for if there's no jobs? And it just was, it devolved. It was like, nope, housing is the most important. And because on the planning committee, a lot of housing advocates sit there, the motion passed to include it 13-8. So as I say, when it gets to the executive committee, and we have more elected officials who deal with, Matt's thing was, let's put that cities and counties have to have in their general plan that RHNA numbers will be met. And I'm like, I said, Matt, you're not dealing with the public. You're not letting local control. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that you can't do that. So that's what I'm running into. I happened to have a conversation with Supervisor Glover on the way home about another topic, and I brought it up, and he just about went through the ceiling because it's like the same thing you just said. What about jobs? So I think if our letter can be with that strong language, and then as we're out and about in our League of the California Cities, different venues that we're in, constantly pushing that at least equal, I think that's the best we could. I'm not asking for us to have he even admitted, well, in Contra Costa, I was amazed. Matt even admitted in Contra Costa County, you don't have a housing problem. Thought it was interesting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
He's always the calm one next to me.
I am. I tend to be the calm one. So I think one thing that I would ask you to do with the letter is borrow from the MTC letter. There's the paragraph before the last paragraph under the heading of moving forward. On the one hand, they identify what I will say is the sort of quintessential notion that we should be looking for with something that purports to be a plan for 2040, which is the process of refining the Bay Area's ideal development pattern. And frankly, I think those of us in Contra Costa County would say that if this is the ideal, it's a really bad ideal. That the ideal should be that we put more jobs closer to housing, that we take a look at the communities around the Bay Area particularly, but golly jeepers, beyond Bay Area even, and look at where communities have done targeted business and commercial development growth to accommodate both existing residents and purported or potential future residents. And there are some really great examples in the Bay Area, like Dublin and Pleasanton. 40 years ago, there was no overwhelming commercial activity in Pleasanton. The business centers, the job centers came and housing followed instead of the other way around. But we have a vast oasis of cities in this county, from Brentwood to Oakley to Antioch, right, and even including Central County, where there was a lot of opportunity to actually put commercial and business-oriented development so that, one, we have places for people to go to work that are closer to where they live, and two, where we can actually have a meaningful impact on traffic patterns. With the due recognition that one will never solve the problem and never get ahead of the problem. We're always going to be chasing the problem because that's how it works the world over. That there's this constant churn of people coming in and people coming out and places to live versus places to work. And, so we'll sort of never get to the ideal development pattern. But I thought that phraseology was sort of unique, particularly ignoring the fact that and consistent with the letter we have from Brentwood's on the dais tonight, that if we simply ignored that a more ideal state would be to have jobs where housing is, then that paragraph to me is sort of folly. So the second component of that is, frankly, the sentence, and I'm not sure, we can't really write this, but I just sort of want to say it. Writing that, quote, we learn more with each cycle and are able to take those lessons and apply them to forecasting modeling as well as our public outreach methods for the next cycle. Sounds really great, but is not borne out by the information that we have in front of us today, because clearly if all we're doing is simply saying burden Contra Costa with more housing and not enough jobs, continuing to keep the jobs further and further to our west, to my way of thinking, that is not learning lessons and applying them. So I would try to style it without wordsmithing it here, but I would try to style something in the letter that says that we encourage the MTC and ABAG to refine their notions of what ideal development is and ideal development patterns, focus more on getting jobs near housing, and try to learn this lesson of the last 40 years that if you simply push residential development further and further east, we're going to continue to make people's lives worse, not better. End of sermon.
Well, and I just realized the responses are due by October 14th, and we're not going to meet again until October 20th. Yeah, so this is going to have to go out beforehand, and so we'll trust you with that refining of the language. But I agree, I think we all do, that it needs to be very strong so that they get the message. And the good news is that our own Julie Pierce and I believe Amy Worth is part of it. They sit on the joint ABAG MTC joint planning committee, and they're going to be meeting twice. Was that what you got, Martin, in the next month or so? Jim Spearing, I guess, is the chair of that. And he invited, I thought it was a closed meeting, but he invited public to come to hear some of these other things. So I've encouraged our county staff to go, and you may want to look at the agendas if it's appropriate for your own city planning staff. And I'm sure Martin will be talking with his colleagues here at CCTA about that. And
Ditto.
Mr. Chairman.
Martin, yes.
Just a couple of points here. One is, my understanding is this priority production idea is, it's going to be worked out for the next RTP, not for this one. We're not going to have all the places identified in time for the EIR or anything like that. It's a new concept, and they're kicking it off now, so don't expect them to appear in the Plan Bay Area 2040.
Oh, I see, I got it a little different, that they
Do-
were going to work to put it in 2040.
I
Stuff
think
needs to be worked out.
I think they're going to have the concept in there, but I don't think they're going to identify the areas. They have to go through this whole thing of cities nominating the areas, submitting them. It's like the PDAs and the PCAs, and then ABAG has to review them, and then they have to map them out.
So within the next 4 years, right?
Yeah, so it's
I
a
still think we need
long
strong
it's a long process, but it'll give us an opportunity to identify the northern waterfront and to get our job numbers in there. So we're looking forward to that. I did talk with Steve Hemiger, and he said that we could submit our comments after the authority meeting, and they would still be accepted. So we got that covered.
Did you confirm that in writing or an email?
No, I have
Please
I have
do.
an eye contact and a nod.
Please confirm it in writing, like an email. Thank you.
I trust him. And then.
I support you on that one.
And then, just to reinforce the concern, I at the meeting this afternoon, I was actually looking at the numbers of what we call LOWUTs, live over here and work over there. Yeah. And this forecast for Contra Costa is going to put 59,000 more employed residents of Contra Costa looking for work to the south and to the west. If you add in Solano, it's 15,000 more from Solano, the imbalance. 15,000 new employed residents in Solano looking for work through Contra Costa and beyond. And then if you throw in Sonoma, they have another 30,000. So it's nearly 100,000 employed residents. If we look at the 2040 scenario, 100,000 employed residents living in Contra Costa, Solano, Sonoma. And the giant sucking sound is in San Francisco, where all the jobs went. And all the jobs go to Oakland, and all the jobs go to San Jose. So we're kind of looking down the barrel of the same gun we were looking at in 1990, which is this huge amount of housing growth in our counties and turning our counties and the counties to the north into bedroom communities, and more stress and strain on 680 and 80, the bridges and the BART line. So we're very concerned about it, and this letter hopefully will underscore that.
Yeah, so maybe if I could add on to that, I think that's a good analogy, and I wonder if there's some way, since you'll get a confirmation that we can submit this after the authority meeting, to translate those employee numbers into trips on our transit systems and on our roadways to indicate what share of the capacity they will use, just the growth. Because I suspect that 100,000 additional people coming through the county every day uses the capacity that we have available at BART, I-80, and 680 without the existing people.
Said a different way, it uses the capacity that we don't have
Yeah.
on
Okay,
the
don't
existing
blend that.
transit system.
No, it was disconcerting to look at the numbers and seeing the job loss from Contra Costa. And as I sit on a very brand new widened Highway 4 and stopping at Somerville every morning because that's where traffic is backing up to. As of today, 6 months after we opened it up, we're already backing up to Somerville. As more and more people are finding is that this is the easiest way to go, and there's more obviously more traffic on there right now because they've deserted all their side streets and all their other ways of getting there, because this is still the fastest and easy way to get there. I can imagine 5 years from now that we'll be back where it's back at A Street or back to Hillcrest, where we're backing up on 4 and all that work.
That's what we
As you say,
experienced in 2024.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So maybe it's time to reintroduce the old style of company towns, where the company comes in, builds the housing, and supplies the housing if they want to build it, and We did. I mean, as I was in Korea, I was in the city of Ulsan, and it's basically run by Hyundai. There's a Hyundai grocery store, the Hyundai hospital, the Hyundai schools, and the Hyundai, everything. Well, maybe we can go back to that same sort of concept where if you're going to put all the jobs there, then supply all the housing and make sure put everybody in. Giant. I mean, Korea was amazing. I don't think there's a single family home over there. Everybody lives in apartments, and there's just rows and rows and rows of apartments. It's not what I envision or what I would want to live in myself, but
When you consider what they lived in 50 years ago, it's
Yeah.
not so bad.
yep.
So I'll move that the draft presented will be revised by staff for presentation to our meeting on October 19th. Is that when we're, the full authority?
First by second, second by David. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries unanimously. On to item 4.0, further discussion of the One Barrier Grant OBAG 2 project screening and selection criteria. Mr. Engelmann.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, Planning Committee Commissioners. Martin Engelmann, Deputy Executive Director for Planning. There are a few items out there on this OBAG 2 issue. It's the One Bay Area Grant issued by MTC, and as the Congestion Management Agency for Contra Costa, we are responsible for issuing the call for projects and selecting the projects and forwarding them to MTC for consideration. We presented this to the Authority Board last month, and they authorized release of the call, but there were a few issues that came up. One was the formula for local streets and roads preservation, and that's going to be discussed at the APC meeting tomorrow morning. So we have a board letter in the APC packet, Administrative Projects Committee packet, and we'll talk about that in the morning. Two issues that came up at the authority meeting. Commissioner Tom Butt was concerned about the anti-displacement policies, and he is working on some policy papers that indicate that some of these provisions for anti-displacement, such as rent control and just cause eviction, don't necessarily work in the right direction, don't necessarily have the intended effect, and in fact could have the opposite of the intended effect of lowering rents. So we have brought that back to you to talk about. And then there's a third issue brought up by Commissioner Newell-Arnrich, and that is that the requirement of the OBAG 2 resolution that MTC adopted, it says that every city and town in the Bay region will have to adopt a resolution indicating that it is going to comply with the Surplus Land Act. And the concern was how many hours of staff time will it take? How many sheets of paper will it take for every jurisdiction in the Bay region to do that? So these two issues are before you, and I guess we could take them one at a time. We're not going to take the local streets and roads preservation formula tonight, talk about that tomorrow morning and bring it back to the authority, but maybe we should start with the Surplus Land Act resolution requirement. And we could send a letter to MTC. We could ask them to remove this requirement, or we could say that we think it's too burdensome. But you will have to all adopt a resolution stating that you'll comply with this state law. So if you think that's good use of government resources, we'll go ahead, go along with it. But what would be your recommendation to the authority with regard to that concern?
David and I are dealing with this. I'm more than David, but we're dealing with this in Pleasant Hill right now. And we have to comply with it because it's law. To have a resolution saying we're going to comply with the law is ridiculous. So I appreciate your suggestion, Martin. I think we say, by operation of law, every jurisdiction has to comply with the Surplus Lands Act. So there's no need for a resolution. That would be my recommendation. As to the anti-displacement, I'll leave that to others for discussion, because I don't have an opinion on that.
Yeah. The proposal, shall we say, is a hammer when a fly swatter is really needed. It seems to me that the simpler approach to achieve the desired result with respect to the Surplus Land Act is to simply have all applications that are filed seeking funding have something where the applicant is declaring that they in fact comply with the Surplus Land Act. That would be a more rational approach than a resolution from the governing body.
John?
I'm happy with David's suggestion. And I think that with regards to the other items, obviously we can talk about those tonight. I think that's also going to be a topic for tomorrow morning's APC meeting, because I think Commissioner Butt is, I assume, based upon what you said, preparing something.
He won't be there.
He won't be there.
Ah, okay.
Because I will.
All right. All right.
I can ask him, but.
Okay. All right.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Oh, okay. I agree that a checkbox or something like that would seem sufficient for the Surplus Land Act. But the anti-housing displacement policy, I think there needs to be more discussion about the policies. But also, it says you can get 0 to 4 points out of a total of 100 points. So I guess it's just for this portion you can get 0 to 4 points?
That's correct.
Okay.
Out of 100.
Doesn't seem a
So-
high priority then, does it?
So if you have a lot of policies on anti-displacement, that local jurisdiction gets 4 points. If they have none, they get 0. If they have a few, they get 2. And that's part of the rating system.
So
We were directed to include something like that in our call for projects. It was required.
So
by
I
agency.
think this came up as a question before. What is a lot? I mean, do you have to have them all to get 4? Or if you have 4, you get 4?
The idea was that it would be grading on the curve, if you want to use that analogy.
Okay.
That the jurisdictions in the county that had the most would get the full 4 points. If you had none, you would get none.
Right.
No points. That's the bottom.
So
And
the
in
other-
between it would be
I'm sorry.
a range.
The other question that came up, I believe, at the authority meeting was a question about what jurisdictions have these already, and I thought that information was going to be coming back, but I haven't seen anything on that yet.
I hadn't understand that was part of what you wanted. We can provide it. We propose to use the urban displacement projects summary, and they did go through all of these different potential policies and compared those policy types to what jurisdictions in the region had, and we have them for all 20 jurisdictions. We've updated them with some information because we sent them out to all the jurisdiction planning staff to make sure that the information was correct, and we have made some changes based on the feedback we received. And we could bring that and put it in the packet for the authority meeting if you'd like.
I think that would be helpful. Because I think there was a discussion about this in terms of if a jurisdiction thinks they're somehow in compliance, but they really aren't, the time frame to add any of these on that they might want to add.
We could, the applications are due December 9th.
Right.
So it's what you have as of December 9th that really counts. So if say in November, a jurisdiction added one of these policies, say a commercial in lieu fee to fund affordable housing, then we would add that as one of the policies that they have and use that in the scoring.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the jurisdictions have the information that they need so that they can compare it to what they have, and should they choose to add more, that they have ample time to do that before the December 9th deadline.
Yeah, we did broadcast out the numbers that we had, the policy information we had. We broadcasted that out to the 20 jurisdictions. We received some corrections. We haven't heard back from everybody, but they're aware that we're kind of tracking this, and maybe we should send out another broadcast to indicate that based upon our review and your comments, these are the final numbers we have that would be reflected on the application unless you take additional action between now and December.
So I'd agree with what Commissioner McCoy said, and I had a question about the first source hiring ordinance. I mean, I know that you can give preference for veterans and things like that. I guess I just want to make sure that if you've got a city whose employed population is not demographically representative of the county or even of a smaller region, that you essentially can discriminate against or discriminate in favor of residents of the city while not running afoul of other equal employment opportunity laws. I just don't know. And I think if we grade on the curve, I mean, one approach may be, for those of us who have some concerns about some of the items that Commissioner Butt mentioned, that if you have a significant number but not all, you can still get the 4 points, which allows you to choose which are the other ones you want, if there are some that you just don't think make good policy.
Well, and you said they're discussing this tomorrow at APC.
Right. But it sounds like Commissioner Butt, who raised the topic, won't be there, so I don't know how.
Then we'll discuss it at the full authority.
Whether the conversation will be any more productive than this one.
Well, Mr. Chairman, so just to clarify, the anti-displacement discussion is occurring here tonight. It'll also occur at the authority meeting when
Okay.
Tom Butt is back. Tomorrow morning, we'll tell them that we talked about it here.
Okay.
But we don't have it on the APC
Okay.
agenda specifically. You do have the option of striking any of these policies. You can do whatever you want on this. We could come up with a new idea on how to reward jurisdictions that support anti-displacement, and we're polling the other counties to find out what they're doing. We don't have all of that information ready for you yet, but I mean, if you want to strike some of these, you could. The authority can decide on the 19th.
So one approach might be to ask the jurisdictions to describe for us in their application what their anti-displacement policies are, describe how effective they believe they've been if they've had them in place, or describe why they think they will be effective if they're putting them in place, and then include this list as things that some jurisdictions are doing. They're examples that they could consider.
Right, excuse me, instead of having a hardcore checklist of this is what you have to do, let it be a little bit more driven by what you are doing as opposed to a checklist that, or where you want to get to, or where you're planning for, as opposed to just, as I say, just a list. Yes, we have this, we have this, we have this. That doesn't necessarily apply in every community and won't work in every community.
But aren't part of these criteria what MTC is looking for? How can we be a little more flexible if they're requiring these things? There's still a time to work with them about refining the criteria?
Well, they're not actually reviewing our policies. They've delegated it to us in
Oh, well,
Resolution
that's cool.
4202.
I like what Don wants to do.
And so if you want to make it into an essay question, we can make it an essay question, if that's your recommendation.
I like Don's suggestion as well. And I certainly would not ever think of speaking for Commissioner Butt. But I do think that, to his point, is that sometimes local jurisdictions has found that certain things work better for them than other things. And we should be responsive to what a local jurisdiction has found works for them, and things that don't work for them, not kind of try and force them into using.
Right, the demographics in all of our communities are different. How we act to people and how we react is all different, and having some stark checklist of things to approve or not approve doesn't work for everyone. And I think Don's suggestion of more of an essay of telling us what you're doing and how you're doing it and how it's solving your problems in that area would be a lot more beneficial.
Short and sweet, I 100% agree.
And given that, then I suggest to my colleagues that we strike the need for the resolution on the complying with the Surplus Lands Act. If it's up to us, just prove what David said, that you will.
That one's not up to us as well.
Oh, jeez. This one is, but this one isn't. We'll go back to what David said.
The specific requirement is, it is from Resolution 4202, every jurisdiction to be eligible for any money has to have the resolution. But the anti-displacement is that it requires us to reward or give more points or have a methodology
I
for
get that.
rewarding jurisdictions that
So
have
we-
more effective anti-displacement.
As it comes to the Surplus Lands Act, we really don't have any ability, so I guess we have to stick with their rules. And if we do, we do.
Well, you can certainly send a letter saying that you don't believe that it's necessary and take
Well, yeah,
your.
let's do that, though. Let's
Yeah.
and maybe we can change some minds on their end.
I think we should do that, and I agree with that. But I also think that we should be prepared for them saying, no, you got to do this.
And if a jurisdiction is applying for grant dollars, they can pass a resolution.
Yeah,
I mean,
but it would be helpful maybe if, to avoid, as one of the commissioners mentioned, how much time it's going to take, maybe there's a template of a resolution out there someplace that you could just give to cities to help them along on this process, to not make it burdensome to them.
The MTC staff has said they are working on a model resolution.
So I would support sending them a letter suggesting that a checklist we think will cause compliance for people who get the funding, and that it's adequate, and we ask them to consider, and if they say no, then we'll look at a resolution.
You got to comply. I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's just frustrating that they're putting a rule on there that you already got to do.
Right, I know.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can we go back on the letter, the last item, or of the letter that was, we talked about and you were going to make it stronger? Ezra Rapport is no longer the executive director, so if that could be addressed to Brad Paul as the assistant or the deputy director, you probably already knew that, but I had it circled and then I forgot. Thank you.
More discussions on this item, or you okay? Is there a motion with this one, or is this just this is not an action item? Let me see. It says action, but I said
Yeah. wrong
Okay.
one. No, way to go. Here it is. Direct staff as appropriate regarding project screening and selection criteria.
okay.
I think we're covered, right?
I think we're covered. Yeah, I don't think we need a motion on this one.
All right.
We've got good direction. Thank you.
Okay. And then 5.0 is approval of a response letter to the Sierra Club regarding status of PDAs. Mr. Engelmann. Yeah, no, I thought it was.
Minor proposed changes.
Yeah.
The lawyer here.
Okay.
I did
So-
find a typo, by the way.
I found one too, but let's see if it was the same one. Projects versus projected?
No, I missed that one.
All right.
Issues versus uses.
Okay, on 5-4, how do I say this? The first sentence to me, just sort of grammatically, I think we ought to break up, because while we are embarking on the second round of funding, we're really not
in control of OBAG 2. We're simply putting together options for funding under a proscribed OBAG 2. So I would just sort of take a look at that. I had a question on the second to last paragraph on that page, which is where it says, according to our records, all of the local jurisdictions Contra Costa have adopted a complete streets plan. Are all of those applicable to the PDAs themselves individually? And if they are, I think we should say so. Because the thing that was being raised by the Sierra Club is that the PDAs themselves don't have complete streets plans.
But do they have to?
Jurisdictions do.
But if the jurisdiction.
Well, I think the point is that then they should say which are.
Correct.
applicable to the
Which are
PDA.
applicable. If the complete streets plans are applicable to the PDA, we should just sort of say so. Because it actually answers the question.
Well, but the real question is they misstated what they mean. There's a requirement in Resolution 4202
Yep.
that jurisdictions either have updated their general plan to comply with the Complete Streets Act after January 1st, 2010, or to have adopted a complete streets resolution. At the time of Sierra Club's letter, the county had not done either. Currently, the county has a complete streets resolution. So when if you look at their letter,
Yeah,
they say that
yeah.
all of the PDAs are the county's PDAs. So their statement now is incorrect. It's not a plan, it's a resolution. That's the actual requirement.
Okay. I would just address it more directly. That's probably the shorter way to say it.
The PDAs.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Next page, second to last paragraph there. I'm looking at the last sentence under the several PDAs has no affordable housing units built section. It says construction of new affordable housing, however, will require significant additional funding to make these projects financially feasible. Just because I'm manically obsessive about this, I would add something that says, and is not in the purview of the authority. The authority doesn't build affordable housing.
I think that's excellent, because that goes to what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
that
Similarly, the next paragraph, the last sentence of that paragraph says the authority is fully committed to implementing PBA 2040, blah, 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 blah. I would add slightly different. The authority is fully committed to implementing infrastructure and transit investments to support housing development and implementing PBA 2040 for the same reason, because we don't build housing. So just let me say it again because I said it fast. So I'd say fully committed to implementing infrastructure and transit investments to support housing development and to implement PBA 2040. All right. Top of the next page, it says regions projects growth, and I think it's regions projected growth. So the sentence would read, the authority recognizes MTC's objective to house 100% of the region's projected growth. I'm guessing that was the intent there.
either way, but yeah, I think projected sounds better.
Yep. Okay. That's it?
And if I may, I just have a question of clarification on your first point back on page 5.4, because maybe when I downloaded it, something was different, but you were talking about the paragraph that says we are now embarking on the second round of funding. Then I have a period called OBAG 2, comma, et cetera. So that was two sentences. I guess I was confused by your.
It looked like a comma on this one.
Yeah, no, you're right, it's a period.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right, so that one's okay. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. Yep.
So leave that as it is?
Yeah,
We are
That is
now,
required.
we are now embarking on the second round of funding, period.
correct.
Called OBAG 2, comma.
Right,
You're okay with that?
yes.
Since you want to move the item,
Say again?
move the item.
I'll move the item. I'll move the item with those proposed
And I'll
revisions.
second it.
Number first by David, a second by Karen, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries unanimously. Other business, hopefully we have none.
And it's still 0-0
One
at the
inning.
bottom of the
Wow,
sixth.
sixth inning,
Okay.
okay.
Pitchers,
News, clippings, and correspondence.
pitchers
There are none.
duel.
And so we will adjourn until our next meeting of November 2nd, 6 p.m. Please